Good afternoon from London. Another bleak, cold, and rainy afternoon here in London. And hello to all dear comrades, friends, and supporters. And this is another video that I am making in response to a request from a viewer who asked who said it would be great to hear more about your experiences in the movement, in particular your views on the collapse of the USSR and what that period was like within the socialist movement at the time. I'd be interested in your thoughts on the future of the labour movement in the UK and hearing more about what led you to career. Your experiences and perspectives are invaluable to us younger comrades here in Britain. Well. I think some of that is really out of the remit of this channel, which is all about the DPRK, Juche and the UK and the British group for the study, the Juche Idea. But I will try to address some of the questions that have been asked about the collapse of the USSR, and of course our Korean comrades actually refer to that often not as the collapse of the USSR, but as the frustration of socialism in the USSR, and indeed the other countries of the socialist camp in Eastern Europe and also in Asia, because don't forget about Mongolia. The Mongolian People's Republic also was a socialist country, and that went with the Soviet Union and the rest. So I think is a subject I can speak about as a Juche Idea follower, and it conveniently sort of dovetails with what led me to support people's career and to become an advocate of the Juche Idea, a Juche Idea follower. And yeah, when the USSR finally disappeared, and by the way, it was not an immediate act. It was a process. We saw the beginning of perestroika and glasnost by Gorbachev, the Judas of the 20th century, one of the biggest traitors there was, along with Khrushchev, but arguably Gorbachev was far worse than Khrushchev because of the immense damage he did and his crime in destroying the first workers and peasants state in the whole world, the socialist Soviet Union. So you had the beginning of glasnost and perestroika back in, I think, 1985, 1986. You had the so-called August coup of 1991, the State's Committee for the State of Emergency, and then you had the final dissolution of the USSR in December 1991, and you saw the very sad and tragic scenes of the red flag being the flag of the Soviet Union, the red flag with the hammer and sickle, being hauled down from the Kremlin. I think it was very heartbreaking scene. Now, I myself had given up on the USSR in the 1980s. Uh, it, and I don't want to seem smug or uh, speak with hindsight, but the uh, frustration of socialism in the USSR and the counter revolution in its collapse did not entirely surprise me. I had been half expecting it, particularly with the, as I say, the onset of glasnost and perestroika in the 80s, which were profoundly counter-revolutionary. And of course, many would argue, and I would actually agree with them, that the collapse of the USSR can be traced right back to the early 60s and in the late 1950s when revisionism appeared in the Soviet Union and the socialist camp. With Khrushchev, particularly with his speech at the 20th Congress of the Communist Party of the Soviet Union. So, it really goes right back to then. But, when you had Gorbachev, uh, banging on about glasnost and perestroika, I knew that probably something very bad would happen in the Soviet Union, and of course, Gorbachev was once described by Thatcher as a man that we can do business with, and I think that was a very significant and telling statement. And very curious, as a curious aside, the CIA used to publish a very nasty propaganda journal, and it was supposed to be very academic and learned, called Problems of Communism. Well, actually, it was the Hoover Institution that used to publish it, but I'm sure the CIA had a hand in it. And I found in a library somewhere, I found a 1979 issue where they actually marked Gorbachev out as the a potential successor to Brezhnev. Now, that's very curious because no one outside of the USSR at that time uh, would have known about Gorbachev, but they did. Was he really working for the CIA right from the start? But anyway, as I say, I had really given up on the USSR back in the early 1980s. So, I can talk a bit about the trajectory that I embarked upon. Now, I had joined the Young Communist League of the old Communist Party of Great Britain in 1975. And in those days, we didn't have the wonderful internet or anything like that. I had to look up the address of the Young Communist League in a Kelly's trade directory in my local reference library. So I wrote off and I joined the Young Communist League in 1975, and then the Communist Party of Great Britain in 1980. Now, I hate to admit this, but at first I actually supported Eurocommunism and the CPGB leadership because I really did not know any better. And yeah, you see, you saw the huge amount of support that the Italian Communist Party got, the French Communist Party, and to some extent the Spanish Communist Party. you know, I thought, we could do with a slice of that in Britain. So, I sort of supported Euro communism. I was never a complete Euro communist. I mean, I also admired Romania under Ceausescu, which at the time used to be praised for its independent policy. But uh, this this didn't go down well with Euro communists who were really anti-communists. Really, uh, their views were really very much like social democracy, and it was no surprise that uh, in, in the end, the Martin Jacques Euro-communist faction of the Communist Party ended up actually openly supporting right-wing social democracy and even making excuses for Thatcher and sort of telling the miners to give up, to end their strike against the government. But I wasn't, initially aware of the very toxic and reactionary counter-revolutionary nature of Eurocommunism. And of course, in those days in Britain, the communist movement was very, very polarised. Maoism had started to die out. So, you had the old Communist Party of Great Britain, and uh, there was very clear sort of polarization between Euro communists on one side and pro Sovietists, or, uh, you know, so called hardliners, but they weren't, most of them weren't really hardline on the other side. Anyway, when I became a student, uh, I decided to study Marxism, and I bought from my local party bookshop a little booklet by Emil Burns called Introduction to Marxism, which had first been published, I think, in 1938, maybe 1938. And of course, they revised the book. It's very far from perfect. The later editions of it were revised in accordance with revisionism, and say parts of the book are rather wooden. And by by the way, Emil Burns, I believe, might have got this wrong, was the great uncle or great uncle of the British comedian Harry Enfield. As Michael Caine would say, not a lot of people know that. But anyway, I read Emil Burns' book. I read the CPGB introductory course about Marxism. I also read the Communist Manifesto and State and Revolution. And it quickly became apparent to me that the policies of the CPGB were very, very far in those days from Marxism. And I also began to take a far more positive attitude to the socialist countries, all of the socialist countries, than I had before. Is reading these books, I learned about the exploitative nature of capitalism, and I think in those days there were a lot of illusions about capitalism, and I think that's partly I think in some European parties gave rise to Eurocommunism, so called, and also strengthened social democracy in many countries. But I think that people had illusions because of the relative boom in the 1960s and 1950s, and also because of the palliative welfare measures adopted by some capitalist states. So I think, uh, you know, people didn't really understand the exploitative nature of capitalism. But, through my reading, I did. So uh, I began to have a very positive view of the socialist countries, which had ended exploitation, where they'd socialised the means of production. And of course, I could say that my views were later be reinforced when I spent 6 years on the dole in the 1980s. Anyway, as I say, the sort of radical opposition in the CPGB was really people who gravitated towards the Soviet Union and regarded it as the great socialist state, bastion of the world proletarian revolution. And for many of these people, the Soviet Union was the be all and end all of it. However, I became disillusioned with the Soviet Union. I was very shocked to read, and I didn't fully understand revisionism at the time, that the Soviets had allowed Pepsi Cola to build a Pepsi Cola plant in the Soviet Union. And I thought, what is this? I thought, isn't Pepsi Cola a symbol of US imperialism? Isn't it a symbol of the enemy of socialism? Isn't Pepsi Cola capitalist? What on earth are they doing, allowing such a thing on sacred soil of a socialist country? So that led me to question the USSR, and also, one day I was actually on holiday in Scotland, and I was, like a good party member, I was reading the Morning Star even on holiday, and read about Hungary joining the IMF and having IMF loans. I thought, this seemed absolutely, crazy, a betrayal, because at the time, everybody was condemning the IMF. It was a horrendous organisation that imposed cutbacks on countries. In Britain, we'd had the IMF cuts in 1976. A socialist country couldn't join the IMF, which was really associated with US imperialism and world monopoly in finance capital. This could not happen. But the Hungarians had joined it, and then there was problems in Poland. They'd put up prices in Poland, which again, I thought, putting up prices is not socialist policy, and I think they'd also were borrowing money from the capitalists. So all this to me seemed very wrong, and so I couldn't support Euro-communism. I couldn't support the Soviet Union, and I didn't want to be a Trotskyite either, as that they were all, just middle class trendies. So I thought, I'll look elsewhere for a socialist model. Now, in those days, say Maoism had virtually disappeared in Britain, and China was discredited because of reform and opening up. So, yeah, I was interested in Cuba, but of course that was close to the Soviet Union. There was Vietnam, uh, and there was Albania, uh, and there was this country, I only knew about because of the uh, Korean War, or Fatherland Liberation Wars, the Koreans call it, uh, the Democratic People's Republic of Korea. And I resolved to try and find out more about that. I got a very negative and rusty answer in my local CBGB branch when I asked about the DPRK. I said, "Oh, what about the Democratic People's Republic of Korea?" And someone replied, "Oh, them. They're like them Chinese, a bit funny." And he said this was the CBGB line on the DPRK, and indeed the line of a lot of the British left. But I was able to find uh, you know one or two books and articles about the DPRK. There was a set of 3 volumes called Marxist Regimes, a World Survey. I think it was published by Macmillan. And there was an article on the DPRK by the American historian Bruce Cummings, bourgeois academic expert, but not half as bad as some of the so-called North Korea experts that tout their stuff these days. In fact, quite different from them. And I was very impressed reading what a high rate of growth the DPRK had, and how it was independent from both the Soviet Union and China. And that impressed me quite a lot. I've always believed in independence within socialism. It's something that's very important. In fact, it's, as Juche teaches us, it's actually the intrinsic nature of socialism. So, it sort of excited my curiosity, and I wanted to find out more and more about the DPRK. One day, when I was, briefly studied on a part-time MA course at Thames Poly, but had to give it up because I was out of work. I used to go down to Woolwich for the lectures, and went in the local library at Woolwich and actually found a DPRK pictorial magazine, which impressed me, particularly articles on agriculture, about the growth of agriculture in the DPRK, and pictures of some Swedish people visiting the DPRK with riding on dodging cars in a fun fair. It all looked very good. And then I think around 85, there was a hostile media article by journalist called Peter McGill in the Observer, and it made me a bit angry. But I didn't know enough to be able to defend the DPRK. So my resolve to find out more about the DPRK deepened. Now, I went to a meeting of my local Morning Star readers and supporters groups. I mean, these were set up in the country in the 80s to support the Morning Star bloc in the CPGB against the Euro-communist leadership. And there was some people from a very, very pro-Soviet group that doesn't exist now called Proletarian, not to get be confused with the CPGBML newspaper Proletarian Online. This was a totally different group, very pro-Soviet people, and as I say, they were the type who did see the USSR as the be all and end all of everything. Uh, so I sort of naively asked, well, where can I find the works of President Kim Il Sung and books about the DPRK? And I got this sort of member of Proletarian who was a greasy biker sort of said to me, "Oh, there's a load in a second-hand bookshop in Northern Road, Southampton, but you don't want to read them. You should read Novosti books." Which, and Novosti was the publishing house of the Soviet Union. Anyway, I didn't listen to him at all. Uh, and at the first opportunity, I beetled off to the second-hand bookshop in Northern Road, and I still have it, a copy of Korean Review 1974 and Kim Il Sung Selected Works, Volume 5. And I was very impressed by what I read, and I totally agreed with what President Kim Il Sung said. So I resolved to become a supporter of People's Korea and the Juche Idea. Funnily enough, at the time, a friend of mine joined a pro-Albanian group, and in those days, Albania used to make themselves out to be the only socialist country in the world. But in Albania, Enver passed, and his successor, Ramiz Alia, was very much the Albanian Gorbachev who smashed socialism up in Albania, a traitor. Uh, so, I think I was right to support the DPRK and not Albania. And the funny thing is, you still get ultra left supporters of Albania like Vijay Singh and a few others, who attacked the DPRK from ultra leftist and dogmatic positions, but they can never explain why Albania fell with the rest of the socialist countries in Eastern Europe. It would have been good if Albania could have survived as a socialist country. It would be good to have a socialist country in Europe. Similarly, it would have been good if Ceausescu hadn't been overthrown, which was another act of treachery by Gorbachev. Both Gorbachev and the US imperialists met in Malta, and part of the agreement, which was not publicised, was for the socialist government in Romania under Ceausescu to be overthrown, and the so-called Romanian Revolution, which of course was a counter-revolution, was really an operation carried out jointly by the CIA and the revisionist KGB. Now, in terms of how the frustration of socialism in the USSR affected people at the time, well, it was a catastrophe and it was a disaster, and I think particularly for the people of the USSR who had to suffer from unemployment through big increases in prices, huge increases in rent, etc. Which was absolutely horrendous in terms of the international communist movement, and I think socialists and communists here. I remember a Korean comrade saying to me that it deprived people of hope, and that's what it did. But of course, we have People's Korea as a socialist country now, even if some people do not realise it. It was, it was really a massive setback. You had people saying they realised, that they felt depressed, that what they believed in was wrong. And I remember a couple of us went to a communist unity meeting in a southern England city, and we were in the New Communist Party, and there was people from the CPB and the CBGB, because this was the last year of the CBGB before Nina Temple liquidated it, and a member of the CBB said, "Oh, Gorbachev made me realise that many of the positions I believed in and defended were wrong." And we thought, what an idiot. And I think we said that Gorbachev should have been shot during the August coup, and apparently this person wrote down, "Oh, NCP are psychopaths." And I was told that. But yeah, I mean, there was, a lot of people got disillusioned. It was, it was undoubtedly a terrible setback. One amusing aside I can offer that in 1991 there was a protest against the first Gulf War, the 1991 war against Iraq, and we actually marched past the Aeroflot offices, whereupon a friend of mine shouted, "KGB, KGB, off your ass and liquidate the bourgeoisie." Quite good. It scans. But this humour aside, it was something that was no joke. You can't joke about it at all. And remembering the personal impact on myself, I say I'd given up on the Soviet Union, but obviously I didn't want to see socialism totally destroyed there. And I remember I was staying at my mother's house in August 1991 when one morning she came and told me, that Gorbachev had been removed and that there was a new leader called Yanayev in power. And this was the State Committee for the State of Emergency. Sadly, that only lasted 3 days, and after that, the Communist Party of the Soviet Union was actually banned, an act of repression, the sort of thing that only a fascist regime would do. But all these liberals in Britain were actually praising it. They were praising what was really fascism. The revisionist Soviet Union tried to do the dirty on the DPRK. They recognised the South Korean puppet regime, but of course the First people to do that was the Hungarian revisionists, those traitors who had joined the IMF early in the 80s, but they were the first in the socialist camp to recognise the South Korean puppets, but the Soviets also did that. In the DPRK published an excellent commentary called Diplomatic Relations Bought and Sold with Dollars. And after the fall of the Soviet Union, the DPRK actually invited Nina Andreeva to the DPRK. She was the founder of the All Union Communist Party of Bolsheviks, and she was also one of the first people to publicly attack perestroika in a letter she wrote called I Cannot Give Up My Principles. That was written in the 1980s and caused big repercussions. But she was invited to the DPRK to lecture at Kim Il-sung University in October 1992. And Comrade Kim Jong-il published many excellent works. I think the best one was called Abuses of Socialism Are Intolerable. That was published in March 1993, and it was a real shot in the arm. And Comrade Kim Jong-il, in the work, made it very clear that it was right opportunism and revisionism that had collapsed and not true socialism. So, that's my sort of take on the fall of the USSR and the collapse of the socialist camp. I think the most important thing is that the People's Korea upheld the banner of socialism, upheld the red flag of socialism, and in April 1992, they drew up the Pyongyang Declaration, let us defend and advance the cause of socialism, which has been signed by many communist and revolutionary parties throughout the world. And today, People's Korea is a shining beacon of socialism, which has free housing, free education, free healthcare, low-cost public transport, and food costs $0.3 per month. It is a socialist paradise. In terms of the future of the movement in the UK, the Labour movement, well, again, it's a subject a bit out of my remit. I can only give very personal views on it. I think basically there needs to be more done to engage with lower paid workers. A lot of them are sort of totally disengaged from the left. Sadly, many are supporting Reform UK and other far-right parties. I think this is a very dangerous phenomenon that we need to reverse. And also, I don't know why they don't set up a national unemployed workers movement like there was in the 1930s. Anyway, I shall stop there because I've been speaking for a very long time. And I hope the person who asked for this video has found it useful. I say a lot of it is really out of the remit of the channel, but I thought I would try and answer the question anyway. So if you have thought this was a good video, please hit the subscribe button of this channel. We are the only 100% pro DPRK, pro Juche YouTube channel in the UK. Yes, there might be other channels about the DPRK in the UK, but they're not ideologically committed to Juche like this one, and we defend people's career with no ifs or buts. You can support our work uh, by in a number of ways. Uh, we are always holding events. We got a meeting this weekend in Brixton. Check out our social media for details. And we urge that if you live in the Greater London area or within easy travelling distance to London, please come. And I've written a number of books defending people's career and explaining the Juche Idea, and so have others in our organisation, and some works being collectively written. There'd be a link to our publishing spot in the description. And lastly, if you have any spare money in these days of austerity and poverty, you can donate to KFA UK or to myself or to both. Anyway, I thank everybody for listening to this very long video, and I will be with you all again soon when I have the live stream on Friday night. I wish you all a good day. Goodbye.